And now, recorded in front of absolutely nobody in their subterranean recording studio deep in the bowels of the Cigar Club of Indiana, it's time for the Five Stones Podcast.
All right, and welcome to the Five Stones Podcast. I am Raymond Modulin, a.k.a. the Real Estate Monkey, but my own little square is missing today because I am being visited down here in my island retreat resort with Mr. Colin Hedegaard.
Good morning, everybody. I am back from assignment, and I can report back that Florida's still hot and humid in the summer.
Yes, and our third host with us, Mr. Trester.
Good morning, everybody. I am Joe Trester, the real estate advocate, and I am sitting alone by myself at the Cigar Club of Indiana.
Joe did not get the invite this week, so that's called selective emailing.
Yes.
So welcome. It's been a week or so, but Colin was on assignment. Maybe he can tell us what he learned a little bit later down there. I think he already recapped it, the major part, right?
Yeah. Florida's still booming. I can report real quickly in 30 seconds. Florida's booming. The Gulf Coast, I talked to some locals. There's now about 3 million people from Tampa down to Sarasota, and they're having all kinds of interesting real estate stuff going on. Condos are getting outpriced, insurance is going through the roof, all kinds of interesting things going on there, which are affecting the real estate world. So
that's basically 1% of the population in that little area,
right on that coast, and it's busy because they bottleneck you down to cross a bridge, you get over a swamp, and there's a lot of people there.
Yeah. All right, so today we wanted to talk a little bit more in the business realm, something that has been greatly bothering the three of us and some small businesses that we own and operate. And between the three of us here, we have owned and operated a bunch of small businesses. We still do. We bought and sold. So this is something that I think we always talk about is planning for the unplannable. I just made that title up.
Planning for the unplanned. That's a good title.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How do you recognize something that is outside of your control? Like the politics that's going on, like weather issues. And we'll talk about that. Things that your business is required to survive, but maybe you weren't prepared for it, or can you even prepare for it?
Well, I think to some extent you can plan for things and you can do things to make your business healthy so that you can withstand things. But there's certainly some things that you cannot plan for it, but you still have to be ready for them because they're real things.
Or you can't control some things. Let's talk about your uncle.
Sure.
He won't mind.
No, he won't mind. Yeah, my uncle ran a business for a long time with my father was a investor in it and a partner. It was a hydroseeding business, which is commercial grass seeding. They spray down a special formula with some straw, shoot it out of trucks, and plant grass at a high, that grows and roots really fast. Hydroseeding. The business ran for 38 years. I would say it was a really successful business. And over the years, I helped and I did things. Dad and I would go and help. And, there were tough times. And, specifically, I remember in 91 or 2, there was a drought. And in Indiana, the grass is very sensitive because it's seasonal grass. And the drought caused a big drop in business, 50%. And that was something that he dealt with and survived. But later in the 2000s, there were two back-to-back summers with droughts in Indiana, and the business didn't survive that. So it came to an end after 38 years, and that was one of those things that could he have pivoted or planned for? I guess that's the part of the conversation we're going to dig into. The health of the business was, I would say, at the time mediocre, which probably hurt. And then 2 years back to back, it was too much for him. So, long story short, that was a weather related thing. The economy was fine. Politics were trucking along. People were building and developing.
You would think after 38 years, a business would be pretty entrenched and livable and sustainable, but it just took a matter of 2 years to really kill that business.
Well, in a business that size, that's a $1 to $2 million business, to $1 to $3 million in revenue. If you think of losing, if you make 1 million in a year, and the next year you make 500,000, well, your expenses, I mean, you can trim them, you can do little things, but it's a big shortfall in revenue.
Yeah.
So unless he had $500,000 saved up for a rainy day, which would be one way to prepare for something like that. But it isn't that feasible in a small business all the time, because he's also trying to grow. He's trying to find new jobs. He's pivoting with other things in the world that are happening. So it isn't that realistic to set aside, a half a year's revenue, for a rainy day.
Now, Joe, I know that you were in the flooring industry for a long time. Did you see, or were you involved in the high level planning of any of that, or did you have anything to do with that?
I did within my paradigms. I ran contract and commercial sales for the company I was with. So I did, most of my work was with new home builders, was with businesses and things of that nature. And, we would go through the same pitfalls that we go through right now with real estate. If real estate was good, people were investing money in their own personal houses, more homes were being built, so there was more work to be done. And when real estate slows down, there's not as many new houses going, there's not as many people investing in their house to put it back on the market. So things slow down a little bit. But a lot of that is stuff that you come to expect. Like, you can see that the beauty of the Midwest is we have the ability to read the tea leaves of what's happening on the coast and know that it's going to hit us somewhere between 2 and 5 years after it hits there. It isn't going to hit us at the same time. So we had the ability to kind of look ahead a little bit and be able to prepare for some of that and get more things under contract and stretch it out to try to ride out the meager times. I think right now is a different world than what we have really dealt with on things before. Like, we're in some situations that are similar, but they're coming out of different causes, and it's very difficult to plan way ahead for something that you don't know will ever exist. We talked about this earlier. I hate to go back to the COVID aspect of things, but no one was prepared for a global shutdown. That wasn't something that anyone has ever seen. No business has ever dealt with something like that before. And I still think we are dealing with the ripple effect of, I don't know, maybe people making snap judgments at the time to try to do something that they weren't really looking at what it was going to cause down the road. And I think and maybe that's something we need to talk about with planning, is when you're making plans and you're making changes to, in this environment, trying to survive. Not only do you have to be able to survive now, but you got to make sure that the decisions you are making now affect things in a way that you can handle them down the road. Like, you can't continue to mortgage all of your future business endeavor to survive the next 2 months, because you can do everything for 2 months, And if you're not looking ahead at what it's going to cause, it's going to get you then. So you've really got to make sure that you are doing every facet of planning, short term, mid range, long term, and really looking at what it's going to cause. And there's a
So,
lot to it.
with that being said, I know that every company wants to be around forever, theoretically. And they want to be doing what they're doing. That's why they're doing it. Would you suggest that every company have a pivot plan in place? Can you say that 3 times?
Pivot plan. I don't think I
Pivot
can.
plan in place?
Pivot plan in place.
In case something happens. And I'm not picking on your uncle at all, but could he have gone to maybe a consulting of farming? Because obviously he had some knowledge of grass and growing. And I'm just wondering if that was something that you had in place to pull out of your pocket.
No, that's a good question, and that's fair. I think for sure. I don't think you can plan to pivot, but I think that you can be open to pivoting, and you can be.
That's a better way of saying
You
it.
can be constantly talking about what would be your considerations. I think you could have a couple things in your hip pocket, because I remember when he started, he was doing jobs like the zoo and the airport, and the city was developing through that period of time when he started that business in the early 80s. And later in the career, it was more of housing developments, and there was less big commercial planning type of stuff.
Right.
The city went through a phase of investing a bunch of money in a bunch of big things, and he was in. But then that helped him grow. But then he had to find, so he was doing residential developments and coming in and grass seeding common areas and helping grade. He added a grader, and he did some pivots to help as things changed from commercial, where the big, the paycheck, the job would take all year.
Yeah.
And the paycheck was huge. Then he had to move to doing 15 jobs a year and getting smaller checks. So
now the other factor in this, and I don't want to belittle this at all, it ran for 38 years. So theoretically, and I can vouch for this personally, if he was 20 when he started it, now you're talking about a guy that's 58. Maybe he didn't want to pivot.
I think there's a factor there.
I mean, we all know a guy right now that is running a business so poorly, but half of the reason he won't upgrade, so to speak, is he is of the age of, I'll take what I take, and in a couple of years, I'll be out the door anyway.
Yeah, that's definitely a factor.
So there is some factor to that, but I'm wondering if, like for the real estate school, Joe and I are involved in this real estate education. Our greatest single threat in my mind is the government changing their standards of what is required. If they make it not required, theoretically, we would be out of business overnight. So that's probably our greatest threat in my mind. Mm-hmm. I have a solution for that, because while we teach real estate, we have a huge technological base of LMS and courses that we could potentially switch to another medical field, for instance, or the legal field.
Insurance.
Yeah, insurance. So while I don't plan on pivoting, I do have something in my hip pocket that should the shit hit the fan and our worst case scenario happen, we at least see an avenue to address it.
I think it's also why you see larger holding companies that last for a very long time, like Berkshire Hathaway. Their pivot is to buy into another industry if one of their industries starts to go south.
Yeah.
Or, for example, Darden Restaurants, one of the largest restaurant companies out there. At one point they owned Smoky Bones and Olive Garden and Red Lobster and like Seasons 57 and 2 or 3 others. Well, 5 or 6 years ago, Red Lobster was starting to go down. Smoky Bones was starting to go down. So they spun both of those off, and I think they picked up Longhorn and added them into their thing. So they stayed within what they knew, but they were willing to pivot and go in a different direction with what they offered so that they could continue to do what they're, what they know. So I think sometimes pivoting comes in the form of bringing a different leg on, so to speak, or being involved in something that like what you were talking about, that the nuts and bolts of how to educate in that style. So maybe what we're educating and what the content is switches to something that is more marketable at that time.
I think another factor in being prepared is the health of the business. And I'm just going to ask Raymond to talk a little bit about going through 2008 and 9 with the real estate school, because it was kind of a new business at that time.
Yeah.
And we're kind of going through another rough economic cycle for real estate, or a little change, but it's much different now probably than it was when you had a new business.
In 2009, the entire year, the school put 19 people through the school. I will be the first to admit, at that time, I was married and my wife worked, basically is the only reason that business survived.
Yeah.
Now, what we have done since then, we have, like Joe has said, we have expanded our other leg into, now we're in 20 states. Plus, like you have said, we had planned, so we built up a little bit of a war chest of cash in the bank so that we could take a 10 or 15% hit and still survive. If we had 2009 again, 2 or 3 years in a row, it would be a substantial hit, and Real University could be in trouble. So we have planned for some of that, but some of it, like you said, is out of our control if the real estate market stays in a funk for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I think Five Stones Mortgage, we've been around for six years now, maybe something like that. But the things that happened early on, during COVID, interest rates were 2.75, and we were, boom, writing loans, hiring people, growing, reinvesting a lot. And when you look back, it's much easier to say, well, if only we'd have done this, and I'm reminded of old things that, I say old things, old sayings, like save for a rainy day. Well, had Uncle Gary maybe saved for a drought day or a rainy day, he might have powered through. And you could always.
Well, I think there's a difference between year 30 in business and year 3 in business. Year 30 in business, yeah, you probably should have been able to save for a rainy day by then. Year 3 of business, you're lucky if you are breaking even and paying yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is, I think I read the statistic, something like 78% of new businesses fail within the first year. 63% fail within 2. But if you can hold on to 5, like 58% of businesses that make it to the 5-year mark have some long-term longevity.
Woohoo!
So, but it's difficult to, break out that gate, do marketing, make money, make the business solvent, and put money away, because it costs so much to get started.
Well, there's other pivots that naturally happen too as you become more efficient. You trim some employees, you cut some expenses, you do some other things to survive rougher patches of business, but if you think the business is viable, you may even have to consider personal investment again, like starting the business off. I think that can be something that you would have to consider if it's for the next 10 years going to be viable. Should I take some of my own assets and put them in there to
I think what would benefit most of the listeners out there, if they are small business, and this is the one I mentioned, I'm going to harp on it again, is to ultimately figure out what your biggest threat is and start trying to solve for that now. Worst case scenario, you're probably no worse off than you were. Best case is you might look like the genius when the drought comes, and all of a sudden that business now becomes, like I said, a consulting business instead of an actual hands-on business. I was just talking to a guy today, the other day at golf, who owns a window manufacturing company. They used to manufacture windows and install them. And he just said just recently, within the last 2 years, they have eliminated the installation because it only reduced their income by 12%, but it reduced their overhead by almost 30 because they no longer had to pay installers. They didn't have to pay, people overtime and benefits. So while they lost income, gross income, their net profit actually went up by getting rid of one of the legs in their business, so to speak.
You mentioned the golf course, and I'm reminded of the very place where we play often. When 30 years ago, the golf club was trying to run its own restaurant, and it was not a good experience for anybody. In other words, the restaurant was losing money. The members were forced to buy food. They were complaining. The quality of the restaurant was not good. It's a golf club trying to run an industry. So, what they pivoted to is they said, why are we battling this? We have this location that is awesome. Let's let somebody else come in and run the restaurant. They leased it out, and now there's the
Big Woods.
Big Woods is there.
Yeah.
And they make way more money. They don't lose money. They make money because they rent space to Big Woods. Big Woods knows how to run a restaurant. They come in and run it, and everybody's winning now. So
that's another example. So I would say, think of your biggest fear and maybe try and plan for that. And maybe that's the unplannable. Now, there are things that are uncontrollable, and I've tried really hard to resist the political atmosphere that we're in right now, but it's almost impossible. And I think we wouldn't do our listeners a favor if we didn't talk about that there are some political things going on that are outside of our control, our immediate control, that could affect business. And like Joe's saying, if you have a long range plan, you've got to figure the politics and the government into this.
That's for sure. I mean, I think during COVID, everything was pretty great because the government was printing money and handing it out, and everybody was kind of ignoring all the other things because they were trying to survive and nobody knew what was happening. Well, now the consequences of that are hitting. Printing $10 trillion. Now we have inflation, and that's causing everybody pain.
Yeah.
And another thought I had just moments ago was that if your business has a weakness, I think that is probably something you should consider in planning and thinking, because a weakness will probably be magnified in a tougher time. Maybe if you have a personnel weakness, or you have a morale issue or whatever, or too big of a marketing budget, some of those weaknesses will haunt you more later, rather than when times are good.
I'm going to throw one in: technology.
Technology is a good one too, yes.
That's actually probably one of most companies' biggest weakness, is the lack of the correct technology. I have a outside business outside of real estate, and I collect rent, basically, is the easy way to look at it. And I still physically collect checks from these people. And if I could get the technology to Venmo, it would make running that business way much easier.
So the technology's there. Maybe that's a personnel
it's
training issue or something.
It's getting the adaptation of that technology by the user, which in my case are tenants, so to speak.
Right.
Well, and I will say that's one of the things. Before we started on this conversation, I started looking at different things that people suggest a company does when you are in a season of struggle, which I would submit that a very large portion of our country is in right now. And one of those things is, instead of in, worrying about what you're going to divest from. Invest in training, invest in things that will help build out and make things stronger from within, so that when the market does flip again and things are growing, everyone is on that same page and you're ready to go. So in your case, maybe right now, while things are a little slower, it is the time to try to install the idea of, you're going to Venmo this or you're going to Zelle this, and that's how we're going to track it. Because right now it's slow enough to teach them how to do that. It's a lot more difficult when everything is gangbusters and money is flowing for you to justify spending that time.
That's a good point. When you're less busy with work, you've got more time to train or change or learn or work on things that you've been putting on the back burner.
Well, and it's the best time to do the pivot because you have time to build into it.
So I want to thank you guys. You've been listening to Five Stones with myself and Colin, and Joe's over there. Notice there's three of us again, and we're still looking for that fourth chair. If anybody's interested, please hit the comments and our producer will get a hold of you. Also, while you're there, hit the subscribe and like button. That will help us help you. And if you have any ideas about what you'd like to talk about or have us talk about, feel free to put that in the comments as well. Gentlemen, any last closing thoughts or comments?
No, let's get somebody on here that maybe went through a different kind of thing. I'd like to hear more stories like my uncle's business.
Yeah, that would be great. If you're out there and you have perhaps pivoted, we'd like to hear that story. Maybe you went from one thing to another. And there are thousands of these stories you can look at. Like Instagram was a gaming site, and then it just pivoted to just pictures and what they've got now. Joe, any last thoughts?
Nope. I encourage you all to reach out to us. We're pretty approachable. So send us some questions, comments, get on here. Let's talk about some stuff. It's fun.
Well, I'm approachable if they can get through the barbed wire fence and the Dobermans I got out in the front yard. Other than that, I'm easily reached.
Use technology.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you guys. And once again, everybody, see you later.
Harumph.